She's been here 20 years, and she still doesn't understand how real business works. The words came from Harlan Devereux Briggs, 61, patriarch of the Devereux family, and the loudest man in any room he entered, spoken across a dinner table in his own house, while his daughter-in-law sat 3 chairs away, holding a glass of water and saying nothing. Tilda Soren Ashby, 37, wife of Calloway. No, she corrected herself silently. Soon-to-be former wife of Calloway Devereux had heard some version of that sentence so many times it no longer stung the way it once had. It settled instead the way cold air settles into an old house through every gap and crack until you stop noticing it and simply wore another layer. What Harlan did not know, what Calloway did not know, what none of them, sitting around that polished table with their wine glasses and their careful laughter, had ever thought to ask, was that Tilda had spent the last 11 years quietly building the company. Harlan had been trying to pitch to for 3 years running, Ashby and Soren Contract Holdings. The name was her mother's maiden name first, her own second, tucked into a private trust structure that no one outside the firm's legal counsel had ever traced back to Tilda herself. The public face of the company was her COO, Bernard Class, 60, a calm man with silver hair and the kind of patience that came from decades of watching clever people underestimate quiet ones. Bernard had been her mother's accountant first. He had watched Tilda build the company from a single timber supply contract she'd negotiated at 26 while Calloway was away at a golf retreat with his father. She had never told Calloway, not because she was hiding something shameful, because in those early years she had wanted one place in her life that belonged entirely to her own effort, her own judgment, her own name. And then the years passed and the company grew and the silence around it became something she was no longer sure how to break. Now the silence was about to break itself. The dinner was a Thursday, which meant the weekend was coming, and the weekend meant the annual Devereux Construction Charity Gala at the Fairmont in downtown Vancouver. Harlan had been planning it for 4 months. He spoke about it, the way he spoke about everything he considered his, loudly, often, and as though anyone listening should feel grateful for the information. This year, he had announced over appetizers he was going to finally secure the attention of Ashby and Soren. He had friends who knew people who knew people. He had prepared a package. He said, with a particular smile directed nowhere near Tilda, connected with the right woman, Calloway, 39. Tilda's husband and Harlan's only son raised his glass and said, "That's the kind of deal that changes everything, Dad." Tilda looked at her water glass. Calloway had not looked at her once during the meal. She had noticed over the past 8 months the way his eyes moved past her now. Not hostile, just absent, the way you stop seeing furniture you've had too long. There was also the matter of Petra Drummond, 32, whose name appeared on Calloway's phone with a frequency that had nothing to do with the investment consultancy she supposedly ran. Tilda had not confronted him. She had instead called her lawyer. Helena Ouvrard, 53, Tilda's legal counsel for the past 9 years, had listened with the focused stillness of someone taking notes in her head while you spoke. When Tilda finished, Helena said only, "Tell me what you want to protect." The prenuptial agreement Calloway had signed 10 years ago was thorough. Helena had drafted it herself at Tilda's request, and Calloway had signed it in a meeting his own father had called routine. Because Harlan had told him the agreement was standard, and Calloway had never read it closely enough to know it was not. The infidelity clause was there. The public defamation clause was there. Tilda's premarital assets were walled behind language so clean it would take years to challenge. Helena had made 2 phone calls after their meeting, the first to a licensed investigator, the second to Tilda, 2 weeks later, to say that what the investigator had found was enough. Tilda had asked her to wait until after the gala, not for revenge, for timing, and because she needed to see one thing for herself. The night of the gala, the Fairmont ballroom looked exactly the way Harlan liked things to look, expensive and obvious. Crystal pendants caught the light above, a room full of developers, contractors, city councillors, and the kind of people who called networking relationship building with the same face they used to say charitable giving. The long tables were set with white linens and small cards bearing the Devereux Construction logo, a gold compass above 2 crossed lines, the kind of symbol designed to look old even though the company was less than 30 years old. Tilda arrived in a charcoal dress that cost more than most people in the room would spend on a piece of furniture. She wore no statement jewelry, only a small gold ring on her right hand that had belonged to her mother, Sigrid Soren, the woman who had taught her to read a balance sheet before she could drive, who had run a small but serious import business out of a Burnaby warehouse for 20 years, who had died of a pulmonary embolism 4 days after Tilda's company signed its largest contract to date and who had never seen the result of everything she'd planted. Calloway was already there when Tilda arrived. He was standing near the bar with Harlan, and Petra Drummond was beside him. Not behind him, beside him. She wore a cream blazer over wide-legged trousers and a confident smile directed at the room in general, the smile of someone who had decided she was already where she was meant to be. She laughed at something Harlan said. Harlan laughed back. Calloway touched the small of her back briefly, the kind of touch that was meant to look casual and instead looked like a choice. Tilda crossed the room without hurrying. Bernard Class was already seated near the charity auction display at the far end of the ballroom, speaking with a woman from a foundation board. He looked up when Tilda passed and gave her the smallest nod. Helena was near the cloakroom, speaking on her phone, her leather folder already under her arm. Calloway saw Tilda and stepped forward. "You look good," he said, "the way you say it when you are trying not to say something else." "Thank you," Tilda said. "So does the room." She greeted a few guests she knew through the company, though none of them knew she knew them through the company. She listened to conversations about interest rates and permit delays and a new transit corridor that would change property values in East Van. She smiled at the right moments. She drank half a glass of white wine and watched Calloway across the room as he introduced Petra to a senior city planner Tilda had worked with on a supply chain initiative 2 years prior. The planner, to his credit, looked briefly confused. He had met Tilda before. He had not put together who her husband was. Then Harlan stood at the front of the room with a microphone. He was good at this. She had to admit it. He moved through the preambles smoothly. Charitable donations, the firm's community commitments, a small joke about parking downtown that got a laugh from everyone who had found parking downtown that evening. Then he arrived at what he had clearly been building toward. "This year, I am proud to announce that Devereux Construction has submitted a formal partnership proposal to Ashby and Soren Contract Holdings, one of Canada's most significant infrastructure supply firms. The kind of partner that doesn't just open doors, it builds them." A round of applause, genuine from the people who knew the name. "I believe," Harlan continued, "that the right connections and the right family name can open any room, and I believe my son is proof of that." He gestured toward Calloway. Calloway raised his glass. Petra smiled at her champagne. Tilda looked at her mother's ring. She thought about the Wednesday morning 2 weeks after her mother died, when she had sat in the Burnaby warehouse office, the one that smelled of lumber and old paper and her mother's instant coffee, and decided that grief was not a reason to stop, and neither was fear. She had signed a contract with a Northern Alberta infrastructure project that afternoon. She had not told anyone, she had simply done it. She thought about every dinner with Harlan, where he had turned to Calloway to explain things about industry that Tilda already knew better than both of them combined, and Calloway had let him, and Tilda had eaten her food and said nothing. She thought about the question she had never been able to answer: had Calloway ever actually seen her, or had he only seen the quiet? Then Harlan said the part that broke something open. "I spoke this week with the executive office at Ashby and Soren. They've agreed to a preliminary meeting next month. I told my contact there that the Devereux name comes with the kind of integrity this industry is built on. A family company, values, legacy." He looked at Tilda then, almost as an afterthought. "Tilda has always been good at keeping the home side of things moving. That matters too, of course." A few people smiled politely. Someone at a nearby table looked at their phone. Calloway did not object. He was looking at Petra. Tilda set down her wine glass. She stood and walked to the end of the table where Bernard was seated. She leaned down and said 3 words. Bernard rose from his chair. He crossed the room slowly, with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never needed to rush a room into listening to him. He stopped near the base of the temporary stage where Harlan still held the microphone. "Mr. Devereux," Bernard said, loud enough that the nearby tables turned, "I apologize for interrupting. I'm Bernard Class, Chief Operating Officer, Ashby and Soren Contract Holdings." The room's attention shifted. Harlan blinked. "Bernard, yes, we spoke on the phone last." "We did," Bernard said. "You submitted a proposal through our public intake channel. We have it under standard review." A pause. "I'm here tonight because the company's principal asked me to attend." Harlan looked pleased. "Excellent. Then we should find a moment to meet her," Bernard said. Harlan's expression went somewhere between confusion and irritation. Bernard turned and looked across the room. The guests near the stage followed his gaze. Tilda did not move quickly. She simply walked back from where she had been standing, through the space that opened in front of her, without her asking for it, until she was standing beside Bernard. The room was quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when they understand something has shifted before they've fully processed what. Calloway's glass was still raised. Harlan's mouth opened and then did not close all the way. Tilda spoke without a microphone, which meant the room had to lean in slightly to hear her, which is exactly what she intended. "My name is Tilda Soren Ashby. I'm the founder and majority owner of Ashby and Soren. She looked at Harlan with the expression of someone who has been patient for so long that the patience itself has become a kind of authority. You told this room that my husband is proof the right family name opens every door. I'd like to suggest the doors you've been trying to open belong to me. No one laughed. A few people exhaled. Harlan turned the color of something overheated. Calloway lowered his glass. Petra stopped smiling into her champagne. Bernard spoke again, still calm. Ashby and Soren's intake team will be in touch regarding the proposal through standard channels. Nothing about that process has changed. He looked at Harlan. However, we do have a separate matter to bring to your attention this evening. Our legal counsel has identified documentation submitted alongside the Devereux proposal that references our company's name and letterhead in connection with credit collateral held by Devereux Developments Limited. The pause was surgical. Documentation we did not issue. The room's murmur started low and rose. Two men near the back, who had been speaking easily a minute before, straightened in their chairs. Calloway said, very quietly, "What?" Harlan's jaw tightened. "That is a misunderstanding that can be explained privately." "It will be," Bernard said. "Our legal counsel and a representative from the financial institution involved are available to speak after the event. Tonight we simply wanted the record clear." He glanced briefly at Tilda. The Ashby and Soren name was used without authorization. That is now documented in this room in front of these witnesses. Helena, from near the back, had stopped speaking on her phone. She was writing. The evening didn't collapse loudly. It deflated, the way a room does when everyone understands the party has changed shape, but no one wants to be the one who says so first. Guests collected their programs. Conversations grew shorter. The charity auction proceeded, but with the energy of something happening out of obligation. The band played one more set with slightly less confidence than before. Tilda did not stay for all of it. She walked to a private meeting room off the main corridor with Helena and Bernard, where two people were already waiting. Lorraine Fitch, 58, a senior compliance officer from Coastal Pacific Credit, and Daniel Ure, 45, a forensic accountant who had been reviewing Devereux's financial filings for the past 6 weeks. The documentation was not subtle once you knew what to look for. Ashby and Soren letterhead, close but not exact. The serif on the company name slightly wrong. The signature block formatted the way the company had formatted it 3 years ago before an internal rebrand. The letters had been submitted as part of a credit extension request filed by Devereux Developments, Limited 18 months prior. They implied a business relationship with Ashby and Soren that did not exist. They implied endorsements of Devereux's financial standing. They were used to secure a line of credit that the company's actual assets likely could not have supported alone. Lorraine opened the file on the table. "We froze the review of Devereux's credit renewal 3 weeks ago when the discrepancy was flagged. Tonight changes the status from discrepancy to documented misrepresentation." Looked at Tilda. "Do you want to proceed?" Tilda thought about the dinner where Harlan had said she didn't understand real business. She thought about Calloway at the gala with his hand on someone else's back, confident enough to bring her to a party his wife would be attending, certain enough that his wife had nothing to say. She thought about the way people confuse gentleness with emptiness and patience with permission. "Yes," she said. She signed the authorization that allowed Ashby and Soren to cooperate fully with the financial institution's investigation, to provide authenticated records, and to pursue civil claims for the unauthorized use of its name and letterhead. Then she drove home alone, through the kind of Vancouver rain that makes the city look like it's being erased and redrawn at the same time, and sat in her car in the parking garage for 4 minutes without moving. She was not celebrating. She had loved Calloway. Not the Calloway of the last 2 years, the one who looked past her and leaned towards someone easier and louder. The earlier one. The one who had driven with her through the Okanagan the summer after they married and stopped the car on the side of the highway because she had seen something in a field she wanted to look at, and he had never asked her why or how long or whether they needed to keep moving. He had just stopped. She had wanted that man to be the whole man. He wasn't. The investigation moved the way quiet processes move. Without drama, without announcement, with the slow, inevitable pressure of accurate information reaching the people authorized to act on it. Coastal Pacific Credit suspended Devereux's credit renewal pending full review. A second lender, connected to a commercial real estate project Harlan had been financing through a holding company, requested updated documentation that the company could not immediately provide. Insurance assessors asked for physical confirmation of assets listed as collateral. Suppliers who had extended terms based on Devereux's apparent financial standing began calling accounts payable with questions. Calloway's personal guarantees on 2 company credit lines became relevant quickly. Harlan had asked him to sign them 2 years ago and described them as routine. Calloway had signed without looking at the full scope of what he was absorbing. By the second week after the gala, Harlan stopped returning messages from his industry contacts. By the third week, the family's Shaughnessy property was listed for sale, though the listing described it as a strategic asset transition, which is a way of saying something true about what is happening without saying the part that hurts. Calloway called Tilda 14 times over a 7-day period. She answered once, on a Tuesday afternoon, because Helena said she could, and because she needed to hear what he sounded like when everything had been removed. He sounded smaller than she expected. Not cruel, just frightened. "I didn't know about the letters," he said. "I swear I didn't know what Dad had done." Tilda was sitting at her desk at the company's Burnaby office, the same building where her mother had worked. The window looked out onto the shipping yard. "Rain again." "I believe you," she said, because she did. Calloway was not careful enough to plan that. He had simply trusted his father the way he trusted everything Harlan told him was standard. "Then why?" "Because you brought Petra to my professional event, Calloway. Because you let your father dismiss me at every table for a decade. Because when I needed you to see me, you looked somewhere it felt easier." She paused. "You didn't need to know about the letters to make those choices." He was quiet. "Did you ever know about the company?" he asked. "About Ashby and Soren?" "No," she said. "You never asked." And then, because she had earned the right to say it plainly, "You never thought there was anything worth asking." She ended the call and sat with the window and the rain and the shipping containers stacked in rows outside, orderly and patient, the way things look when they have been put exactly where they belong. The divorce proceeded as Helena had designed it. The prenuptial agreement held. The infidelity clause applied. The public conduct clause applied, given the nature of what had occurred at the gala. Calloway received nothing from Tilda's pre-marital assets, which constituted the significant majority of what she owned. He signed the final documents without objection. He had run out of arguments by then, or perhaps he had finally started listening to the ones she had been making for years without words. Harlan contested nothing either. He was occupied with other concerns. Petra Drummond had deleted every photograph of herself with Calloway within 48 hours of the gala. She had submitted a formal statement to Helena's office, confirming she had no knowledge of the documentation, misrepresentation, and had no business relationship with Ashby and Soren. Both statements were accurate. She had wanted Calloway's life, or the version of it she had believed existed. The house in Shaughnessy, the family name in construction circles, the assumption of security. She had not understood that the floor under all of it had belonged to the quiet woman she'd been standing beside. By the time she understood, there was no floor left to stand on. Tilda did not contact Petra. There was nothing to say that the situation had not already said more clearly. 6 months after the gala, Ashby and Soren announced a new initiative. The Soren Supply Access Program, named for Tilda's mother, was a mentorship and contract access program for women-owned small businesses in infrastructure supply, the kind of companies that had the capacity and the competence, and were consistently overlooked at the first door. Bernard announced it at a business development event in Calgary. He read the program's statement of purpose aloud, including the line Tilda had written herself. "This program exists because my mother knew what it cost to do excellent work in rooms that had not been built for you. She never stopped building anyway." There was applause. Tilda was not in the room. She was in Burnaby at her desk, reviewing a new contract. The night the program launched publicly, Calloway left a voicemail. It was 2 minutes long. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't understood. He said he hoped she knew he had cared, even when he had failed to show it. His voice broke once near the end when he said her name. Tilda listened to it twice. Then she set her phone face down on the desk and looked at her mother's ring on her right hand. She did not call back. Not because she was cruel, because some doors open inward, and this one had already closed from her side, carefully with her own hand. At the moment she had decided that being loved quietly from a distance was not the same as being loved at all. The program launched with 12 companies in its first cohort. By the end of the year, 3 of them had signed their first government supply contracts. Tilda did not make a statement about her marriage, or Harlan, or Petra, or the gala. She gave one interview to a trade publication that covered infrastructure and supply chain, and she talked only about her mother and the company and what she believed the industry was capable of when it stopped confusing visibility with value. The interviewer asked, near the end, what she wanted people to understand about how she had built what she'd built. Tilda was quiet for a moment, not because she didn't know the answer. "My mother used to say that real strength doesn't need an audience to stay strong," she said. "It just keeps working. And one day, the work is impossible to overlook." She touched the ring on her right hand and did not say anything else. She didn't need to. Everything that needed saying had already been said, in the shape of the company, the program, the contracts, and the quiet room she had walked into on the night of the gala, and filled simply by being exactly who she had always been. Some people spend their lives trying to get into rooms that were built for other people. Tilda Soren Ashby had simply built a better room, and when the time came, she had opened the door herself.